Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. This is the final segment of today's show, and it should be a very exciting one. We are going to be looking at the potential NBA Finals betting odds, the potential NBA Finals storylines, should the Dallas Mavericks win tonight, as everyone expects. I think that this series is going to be very tough for a Boston Celtics team who could have lost at least 3 of the games they played in that 4-game series. They were very lucky to even win last night and win the game before. But ultimately, I think that this series is going to be a huge test for them should Dallas win tonight. We'll get to those storylines in a bit. But looking at the odds for the championship, I think that the Celtics right now are the highest odds. Last time I checked, they were at minus 225. And in terms of conference, they had an exorbitant sum on the money line for them. In terms of Dallas, they are at plus 185 for their money line to win the championship. And in terms of conference, they're at minus 2,500. I think that in terms of if this is going to be the finals matchup, I still think the Celtics will be the favorites, even though Luka and Kyrie have been the best duo of these playoffs. I just think that it's their time to break through. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are in their 19th and 21st series, respectively, before winning an NBA Finals. Very similar to someone named LeBron James, if you've ever heard of him, before he won an NBA Finals. So I just think that this is their time to break through. I don't think that they're the same team as they were. We saw in the series that when tested, when they were down and they looked like they were out, they came back in both game 3 and 4 in good fashion, even in game 1 when they went to overtime. So I think that the Celtics are better equipped now than they ever were, especially if Kristaps Porzingis returns to combat what Dallas has to offer should they clinch tonight. Let's get into some of the storylines, starting off with KP's return. I think that the Celtics made a very interesting decision to hold him out of Game 4. Obviously, if you're the Boston Celtics, you may have wanted to see how KP looked in game action. Obviously, just putting him straight into the finals could affect his style of play. Obviously, they're going to need a big man to combat the very energetic Derek Lively II and Daniel Gafford down low. But ultimately, I think it's a good decision. They want KP to get his rest. I think it's well-deserved. He needs to be healthy in order for him to be productive in this finals. However, I do think it may kind of muddy the waters of who the betting favorite for finals MVP could be. Ultimately, right now, Jason Tatum leads the odds and even odds. Luka Doncic is at plus 280, and Jaylen Brown right now is at plus 425 after winning the Eastern Conference Finals MVP Larry Bird Trophy. Congratulations to him. He had a stellar series. But looking at how this would be affected if KP returns, I think that KP is obviously going to limit how Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum play. They're very 1-2 my turn, your turn kind of players. I think KP's addition to this offense helps that kind of stagnated mindset where Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown feel as if they need to score the points for the Celtics. He adds a lot more in the pick and roll, in the post-up. I just think that Kristaps Porzingis, if he's fully fit and plays as if he's fully fit, could kind of limit how people go forward in terms of who they view as the betting favorite. That might elevate a player such as Luka Doncic. Right now, Luka Doncic is second in terms of the betting odds for NBA Finals MVP. Deservedly so. He's part of that duo with Kyrie Irving that has been so incredible in this series against Minnesota. Obviously, he's averaged over 35 points per game in this series. So, Luka Doncic right now could find himself, if the Dallas Mavericks win this series and maybe even get an early lead in the NBA Finals should they get there. I think that Luka Doncic gets vaulted up due to the fact that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown will now have to include Kristaps Porzingis into their offensive thoughts and mindset So look for Luka Doncic's name to rise potentially to that number one spot right now. Jason Tatum obviously may have been affected by not winning the Eastern Conference Finals MVP as well. Still had a very good series, had some very good stat lines obviously in Game 3. Very impressive stat line where he was the first player to have a stat line of that kind without any turnovers. But ultimately, the Dallas Mavericks are a different animal in my opinion, and I just think that Luka Doncic could find himself sitting pretty at the top of the NFL of the NBA Finals, MVP rankings. Now, looking ahead as to how KP will have to play against Lively and Gafford, I think that the Dallas Mavericks have the benefit of rotation between these two exciting young players in their defensive front. I think that Lively and Gafford are two spark plugs. They don't score points, but they're definitely going to be tasked with limiting the production of Kristaps Porzingis. Obviously, I think that if this were to be the finals matchup, the Dallas Mavericks would have the advantage in the front court because of the fact that Kristaps Porzingis is more or less the number one standard for the Celtics front court. Obviously, Al Horford can't add that three-point production on the offensive side, but defensively, he has proven to be a liability whenever Miles Turner or Pascal Siakam would switch onto him in that Eastern Conference Finals series. So ultimately, I think that Lively and Gafford will be able to get their opportunities to add their role-playing depth and tenacity down low in the paint to combat Kristaps Porzingis and not fully fit Kristaps Porzingis as well. Also, I think Joe Mazzulla will have to be tasked with figuring out how to combat them as well. Obviously, we haven't seen in the Pacers series anyone outside of Al Horford be able to produce except for Oshae Brissett, but he was more in terms of filling out some minutes. So Joe Mazzulla is going to have to be tactically sound in how he sets up his front court and who gets a number of minutes. Obviously, there seems to be a trust issue between Joe Mazzulla and some of his bench players. He's more confident playing some backcourt role players and not some frontcourt role players. Obviously, Luke Cornett's injury was also a very big thing that kind of influenced that decision-making, where Joe Mazzulla felt that he had to force his hand and had to put Al Horford out there for an exorbitant amount of minutes. Al Horford's aging, he can't play that many minutes, so who will be the Celtics role player in terms of frontcourt play that will step up and be the number one guy behind Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford when needed? I think that in terms of fantasy, I think that you will have to look at Celtics frontcourt players now because of the fact that Joe Mazzulla has no choice but to play more than two frontcourt players to combat Lively and Gafford, because honestly, they have the advantage in the frontcourt and maybe even the backcourt because they match up so well for their style of play to kind of combat Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So looking at these two duos then, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown against Luka Doncic and Kyrie, what we've seen out of Luka and Kyrie is the fact that they can play off each other so well. Kyrie's kind of the driving presence. He wants to get into the paint, get to the rim. Luka is then able to get his mid-range going and the three-point production going. As we can see, it's kind of a tale of two halves where Kyrie kind of takes over one half and Luka kind of elevates his play in a latter half, whereas Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they don't really have those moments where one of them steps to the plate. And that has been a huge problem for Boston. Which one of them is going to be that personality that says, hey, I'm dominating the ball? It looks like Jaylen Brown might be the guy going forward because of the fact that as Eastern Conference Finals MVP, he did have that big game in Game 2 where he had 40 points. But ultimately, going forward, it's going to be very interesting to see how the Celtics star style of play and the Mavericks star style of play is affected by which coach is able to adapt to the adjustments the other coach makes. I think that right now, Jason Kidd should feel happy that his duo is going, but he knows that offensive production is enough. And Joe Mazzulla, on the other hand, is going to have to worry about his defensive structure. Can Kristaps Porzingis hold up against two very spark-pluggy kind of players in terms of Lively and Gafford, and who he will have to play to kind of add to the minutes and production off the bench for his front court so that Kristaps Porzingis doesn't get tired, nor does Al Horford as well. But that should just about do it for this segment. I love talking about the potential NBA Finals implications should the Mavericks win tonight. Should be a very exciting game for tonight in the Western Conference. But that is going to do it from the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show, please. Also consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It'll be very appreciated for the network, me, and my fellow podcasters. But that's just about do it. My name's been Christopher Sheppard. Join us tomorrow. We should have another exciting show ahead. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to